Welcome to Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Halderman, and each week we're going to dive into a different piece of content, film and television, and we're going to talk with some of the biggest names in front of and behind the camera as we dive deep into how they were financed, produced, developed, marketed, and the crazy stories behind how many of them got made. On today's episode of Greenlit, I'm chatting with actor and writer and producer, David Dastmalchian. On today's episode, I'm chatting with David Dastmalchian. David is one of those actors that you immediately see and say, oh, that guy. We were fortunate enough to work with David on a film called Teacher in 2018, directed by our colleague Adam Dick, and a great project and a really fun process of getting to spend time with David. Again, he's someone you look at and immediately recognize from films like Prisoners, which was a big breakout role for him, as well as The Dark Knight, and then also being now a part of the Ant-Man franchise. But above all that, David also has a really interesting story, having crafted one of the first pieces of content that helps him break into the business on a project called Animals. So today we're talking with David across a myriad of topics, and him working with big, well-known established directors like Denis Villeneuve, all the way down to working with David Lynch, which was one of his dreams. So without further ado, enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with our friend and colleague, David Dastmalchian. Welcome back to Greenlit. Today I'm talking with actor, producer, director, and a colleague of ours, David Dastmalchian. Dave, thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
So we've made a couple of projects with David over the years, and we're actually here to talk about something that I think is sort of a new normal in the business, which is actors and performers and creators creating opportunities for themselves and using that as a launch pad for many things as a long-term strategy. And I know we're going to talk mainly about one specific project, and then I'd love to launch into a handful of other things that you've done over the years. I think you certainly have one of those faces where people recognize you from so many different things. And that's what's so interesting about your career, especially in the last 10 years or so. So I'd like to start with this project Animals and how Animals got greenlit.
Then thanks for bringing Animals up. It's a project that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm looking at our South by Southwest poster in my office actually right now, and our trophy sits right there amidst all the other wonderful, cool things that I've collected over the years. I'm a bit of a collector. I grew up in Kansas City on comic books, movies, and horror. And so now that I get to have the job that I have is such an insane blessing. But to talk about Animals, I think it's important to talk about the build up to how that all came to be, which is what your question was. And so with a little prefacing, I moved from Kansas City to Chicago, studied acting at the theater school at DePaul University, where I got some incredible training as an actor and learned about the art of storytelling. Started to make my transition from college to the professional world of acting, which at that point was theater and the small amount of television film, mostly commercials in Chicago. And unfortunately, at that point in my life, I was battling a near fatal addiction. And so struggling with addiction and mental illness and depression were things that had grown and grown and grown over the course of my collegiate experience, to the point that when I was ready to enter the adult world, if you will, I was completely handicapped by my own condition. So it required several years of hard work and a lot of miracles, but I did, thank God, finally get clean and sober and got the help that I needed. And I found myself back at square one, and I was in Chicago, and I was working jobs that I didn't necessarily love. I was a usher at a movie theater in the evenings because I love cinema, and I was working telemarketing during the day, working for Time Life and Time Warner, and I just kept doing the things that I knew I needed to do to stay sober, to stay alive. And slowly, I was able to start getting back on stage. Some friends allowed me to be in plays. And that whole time, with the fear in me that had grown out of, will I ever be an actor again? I knew the healing and transformative power of writing. And so I was journaling constantly and I was writing constantly. I had this idea for this script based loosely on my experiences as an addict, which I called Animals. And I was writing it in both graphic novel form, short story form. Then I started to study the art of screenwriting, and I would go to the library and go online and see as much as I could learn about screenwriting. And I used notebooks and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And around that time, I was able to get some television commercial work. And one of the commercials, the first big commercial that I ever got cast in, which was the transition point for me into starting to make it as a professional actor where I didn't have another job, was doing cell phone and burger commercials, all directed by the incredible indie film legend, Chris Smith, who directed the documentary American Movie. He directed the Fire Fest documentary recently on Netflix and so many other films. But Chris and I really bonded, and he taught me a lot about acting on film. And he was very encouraging when I would say, you know, I'm writing something. Would you be willing to look at it and give me notes when you have a chance? Meanwhile, I knew that the commercials and the theater I was doing were creating great opportunities for myself. But my dream was to make movies and to work in television and film. So I started writing other scripts as well with my friends. We wrote a television concept that we shot as a web series that I think still exists on the YouTube to this day and maybe got 1,000 views, and it never took off and nobody bought it. But man, did we learn a ton about how to use $400 to budget a day of, you know, catering, location, equipment, crew. And then all these things kind of happened at one time. I kept going on auditions, not getting jobs, but I just knew what I was doing. I loved. I was making minimum wage, it's the equivalent as an actor, but I was doing it, and I knew creating my own opportunity was going to be the way to make it happen. And all of a sudden, I got cast in this amazing, small but memorable role in The Dark Knight. And at that same time, I had now done about 30 rewrites on my drafts of Animals. And my dear friend Colin Shifley, who I had met in Chicago doing short films, he had moved to LA around the same time as me. And I moved out to LA, and I was still writing that web show with my friends. And Colin was editing all the web show for me. And he and I started making short films together just because we wanted to be creating stuff and literally to try and figure out how to make these things work. And we made some really cool short films, which got into like Holly Shorts Film Festival, and they became, you know, a bit of like a calling card for Colin. And also, for me, I found this great collaborator. So out of the blue, I get a call from Chris Smith. This is, you got to remember, guys, somebody who I just look up to and idolize so much. And he says, David, I just read, I'm in London. He calls me from London. I just read your draft of Animals. It's such a great script. You have to make this movie. I want to direct it. The first thing he says, I want to direct it. My mind is blown. I'm thinking, oh my God, this Sundance winning, incredible, legendary filmmaker wants to make my movie. He comes to LA a few weeks later. We have this big meeting. And I brought Colin with me because at that time, Colin was the one helping me with the script and really helping me beat out, like, what are these acts? And what is this, you know, crisis point mean? And how do we break the story and all these things that we're trying to do? And him and as a director and me as a writer and actor are trying to piece that together. So Colin comes with me to this meeting with Chris with all this work that we've done visually and writing out and doing pictures, which are storyboards if you think about it, but we hadn't looked at it that way. And Chris is like, Dave, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. He's like, basically, I'm looking at my schedule. I have about 3 or 4 years of work right now. I think you should play the lead in this film. And I think if you wait too long, you'll age out of the role. But I'll produce it. I'll help you. I'll put my name on it. I'll help introduce you to people that I can. But I think you should find the director that has the time to do it. And he's looking through Colin's, you know, book that he's made with me. He goes, why are you directing this movie? And Colin said, I don't know. And I said, yeah, it's right. So immediately we set to work on Colin directing this script that I wrote. And we read a lot of books at that time, especially some great biographies about the Coen brothers, who were big heroes to us. And we'd read this story about when they were putting together Blood Simple, how they had gone basically door to door, their family dentist, their family's insurance broker, with their briefcase and their presentation. And I think they might have even taken a Super 8 and done like a in-person demo, like you're selling a vacuum cleaner. But I was so passionate about this story, and it was so personal to me. They say write what you know, and I'm not saying that you have to write your biography, but you have to write what you know. So if you're writing a terrifying horror film about a monster, you need to have that monster represent something that actually scares you. And I'm not saying, it has to be literal. So don't misinterpret. I'm not saying, you have to write your personal story. I mean, mine happened to be about heroin addiction. That's something that I battle with, but it's still fictional story that I crafted, with a narrative that could fit into an hour and a half. So passionate about this. Colin's vision was just clicking. Chris, we would email material. We still knew that then Chris was so busy, and he's the kind of person you weren't going to be able to pin down and be like, we have to meet every Thursday. We have to do this every week. He was going to be able to say, like, I give this project my blessing. And that in itself can be very validating, especially when you're trying to get other people attached. So then we had this incredible producer named Mary Pat Bintel read the script. I had a manager at the time, and the manager did send the script to Mary Pat. She read it, and she really, really loved it. We met for coffee, and she said that she wanted to help produce the film. In the beginning, we were imagining and dreaming that we could get a budget of, somewhere between $750,000 to $1 million. The film also included some kind of fantastical animatics and stuff at that point. As reality started to set in, we thought more about how we could make the film for $500,000. We also, because I set the film in Chicago, we're very determined to shoot it in Chicago, and we were trying to figure out how we could make that happen. So between the short films that Colin and I made, the screenplay that now is in its 50th rewrite, and based on notes from Chris, from Mary Pat, from Colin, from other people I had met along the path as an actor, all of the storyboard and pitch book and market comparison work that we had done to put together a really nice presentation, Colin and I put together some very formal, very heartfelt emails to our friends and family. And we built this idea that we could make the film. At that point, the goal was $500,000. And our vision was to sell units of investment at $5,000 a piece. And the way that it worked in our pitch was, if you bought $5,000 unit investment, that was your stake in the film, and then that was whatever the percentage of the final budget ended up being. That was our investors were going to obviously follow we were following a pretty traditional investment return policy, and then if you bought 3 units, you could be, I forget now the levels, but it was like associate producer. If you bought 5 units, you were a co-producer. And if you bought 10 units, you were an executive producer on the film. And we sent these emails to our friends and family saying, if you know somebody, this is a film that is going to star an unknown actor and a bunch of really talented Chicago actors with an unknown director. It's about addiction. Please don't. We were very honest. We said, this isn't the film to invest in if you're looking to bank your, retirement money on some, long shot or whatever. This is the film to invest in if you believe in it. And we believe it's an important film that should be made because why? And I believe that as dark as that film is, and as difficult at times as it can be to watch, it has a very hopeful message about addiction and about the struggle that people face, whether they're addicts or not. So that was our pitch. And we did use market examples because you have to have smart business. So we did show films that were made for, small budgets and that had some success, and what success meant. Would it be successful to you as an EP if you could just go to a cool film festival. Is that something that would be neat to you? So we reached out to our family and friends. Do you know somebody who fits this criteria? And they just started, I know my friend is talked about possibly investing in film finance. They have some extra capital that they think it would be fun. And another people, who say, well, this person's looking for a really solid investment with this extra money they had this year. And it was tricky. So we were trying to figure out how to be as forthcoming as possible and yet still really get people excited about wanting to give us their money to make this movie. And we sat in people's living rooms, kitchens. We did maybe 30 pitches like that. They were exhausting and embarrassing at times, and uncomfortable and wonderful, and all the range of emotions. There was times when you really connected with somebody and then you left and they never called you back. And there was people that you thought hated the idea and then they called you later and said, I want to be a co-producer. But ultimately, in the end, we were able to garner about $200,000 that we were close at locking. And Colin and I, we felt like we were in this holding pattern where we had our cast now. We'd found the best actors for the roles. We had a crew that was ready to go. And so we looked again at the budget, and we worked with Mary Pat, and we worked with the city of Chicago, and we worked with everybody we could work with. Oh man, Matt, there's so many stories. I haven't let you say one word, but this is getting me going now. It's good, man. It's so crazy. So now that I'm remembering this, it's like at one point, Chris said to us, you build it, they will come. The old phrase, Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams, yeah. So we just went, and at this point, I didn't have like a nest egg. I hadn't been in any big films yet. I had done The Dark Knight, which was an incredible, groundbreaking experience for me. I had shot Prisoners with Denis, which was my experience. I met Denis by taping an audition at a casting director's office and getting cast in Prisoners. But so I had shot Prisoners, but it hadn't come out yet. And we go back to Chicago where I have all these connections. My wife quits her job. We said, well, we don't have any kids yet. So we only have, maybe $5-6 grand. And then we were paying ourselves, but like minimum wage through the film. So I was maybe, getting $750 a week or something, just to float. And we found Airbnbs. This is not something I would recommend to anybody watching this, but this is just to demonstrate how committed this group of people were to helping get this film made. People were working for basically between 100 and at our top crew, like $175 a day. The director, Colin, myself, who is the actor, writer, producer, and I did background casting and locations. Our first AD, our production designer, our hair and makeup artist. We only had a budget for someone who could do both. So we had a hair and makeup artist, and our cinematographer, Larkin Donnelly. All 6 of us. I was able to get a 1-bedroom Airbnb in Chicago. I don't know how they agreed to that, but we did it. It had 1 shower, and we were on a rotating schedule. We were working committed to 12-hour days from start to finish because we were paying people so little. We knew we weren't going to be able to afford overtime, and we didn't want to push our crew to the point where they felt resentful. So we were Colin planned his shots and his days so intensely with our first AD and DP that inevitably every day when something would go wrong, when like some permit that we had gotten and had been agreed to, they would say, no, you can't shoot here. We always had to adjust on the fly, but the planning and preparation was so well done that like we were able to, it was amazing. Get what we needed in. We never went over our days. And another really quick story that I think is really beneficial when you're thinking about this, what we lacked in cash, we had to make up in other realms. So one of the things was we knew we had this small camera package that we'd gotten an incredibly good deal on because we pitched our idea and the passion that we had for this film. So the camera package was small, but it was a great package, and we didn't have a production office, and we couldn't use the Airbnb. We had one actor in from out of town, and we by SAG rules needed her own place. So we got, obviously we weren't going to make her live with us. She didn't really know us that well. She was our female lead. So we got her own Airbnb, but it's like, where are we going to do our production office? I went to my old college and they said, sure, maybe we've got some empty offices, but there's going to be, you'd have to move on Tuesdays and Wednesdays or something. We're like, no, when you have a production office, it has to be an office. So I reached out to the alderman of the uptown neighborhood where I used to live, and I had campaigned for him back when he was running. He said, I know a real estate developer that may have some abandoned spaces right now that are open for the month. He put us in touch with this wonderful developer named Jay Michael, who I thought I was going to be able to get cash to continue to invest in the film. And he wasn't interested in cash, but what he did do was he made an incredible trade for us. He gave us this great space for an office right in the hub of our locations. It was so perfect, and it was huge, in exchange for shooting a commercial for his company. He had properties around Chicago. So we traded a really well-made commercial, which took time and energy that we didn't have, but we didn't have the cash. So we traded that in exchange for this amazing production office, which came so in hand. I mean, it was just such a clutch thing. But yeah, so this is 2013. We went to start shooting in July. We pushed schedule a couple of weeks because of snafus with, at one point, my two biggest investors both came in. One came in at 50 and another came in at north of 80. One of my investors got cold feet. One of my biggest investors, right as we were about to start filming, the same day that our biggest location, which was a hospital, who had agreed to let us shoot there for free because they were being charitable, the administrator read my script and thought it was offensive, and so they decided they weren't going to give us permission anymore. But one of my biggest investors said, I talked to somebody and I just don't think this is a good idea. And she said, maybe I'll give you $5,000 a week and you just send me footage so I can see. And at this point I had to do like our SAG deposits were due and peer deposits were due. I was like, it doesn't work like that. Like, I have to escrow this money. So that's where you learn how to just be I prayed a lot for sure. I can't say it was all skill, but I did have to keep my cool, instill in her the confidence that we were going to make something that she could be really proud of. And like I told you before, my wife, when she quit her job, and who had never worked in film before and came to be our art director and did a heck of a job, by the way, she worked for free. When we went to go do this, we said, well, this is the time in our lives when we can do this kind of risky, crazy, let's spend, a year of our lives doing this because we don't have kids yet. And we found out a few days before principal photography that my wife was pregnant. And we shot this movie in 22 days. Chris Smith came in major way because he had a post house in Milwaukee with a great editor. Because his company's home base was in Milwaukee, which is where he started his career. And so he let us do all of our posts in Milwaukee for free. And his assistant, who is also a great editor, our friend Amanda, she cut with Colin unfettered, and we had access to some incredible editors like Barry Polterman, who had an office in Milwaukee, who would give notes. Mary Pat, obviously, Chris. At this point, I'd gotten to be friendly with Denis because I'd worked on a film with him, and I was able to send him a rough cut and get his notes, which were really useful. And we submitted to South by Southwest the rough cut of the film, and it got in. And that following March, we were at South by. My wife was 8 months pregnant, and we won a grand jury prize, and the film was bought by Oscilloscope Labs at a few months after the festival, but we first made contact and started the conversation at South by. So I've now been talking straight for the last probably 45 minutes, but thank you for listening, Matt. I haven't told that story in such a long time, and it fills me with so much, like, I get the nervous sweats when I think back to some of those moments when I've got 20 people that I've brought to do this thing, and I thought we were going to have to tell them it wasn't going to happen. But I also get so much pride and joy when I think about, like, those days when the Lincoln Park Zoo, who we'd had written agreements with, came out with security and said, you can't film here. And somebody different was in charge that day and decided they weren't going to let us film. What are we going to do? Argue with the Lincoln Park Zoo? No, we had to go on the other side of the fence and figure out a way to creatively. But anyway,
it's awesome.
So thank you.
No, it's awesome, and I think I liked what your sort of segue about reading the books on the Coen brothers and Blood Simple. Did this film, now looking back on it, it certainly feels like a lot of those you followed a lot of those lessons, and you went through a lot of the bumps in the road that. I think all early filmmakers go through in one way or another as they're putting projects together. And you have, like you've said, you've got passion and love for that story, but you've also got you're in a different paragraph in your life's story right now. And that was an earlier paragraph, but an important one. And I guess I'm curious to know, thinking that you made a comment when you and I were chatting offline about the sort of long-term business plan of this movie, and it's serving that purpose and it being a catalyst for building a career around it. Talk us through that. Talk us through how the film changed things for you.
Absolutely. That film changed things in many regards as much as my first acting break being in The Dark Knight changed things for me in a less maybe visible way to the market, but in a very real, tangible way. I can trace so many of the opportunities and things that have happened in my life in the years since 2013 when we went to film Animals to Animals itself. Like, here's just a small example, but and I am a multi-hyphenate, so I'm somebody that writes and acts and produces. I haven't directed, but I would say, like, it's insane when I think back to that time in March of 2014. We're there at South by Southwest Film Festival, and all of a sudden, Sarah Finn is there she's a big, incredible casting director in Hollywood, and she's working at that moment promoting Jon Favreau's what was it called? Chef, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he was launching that at South by, and Sarah, who's casting for Marvel, is totally, like, engaging with me, and has now brought me in for this role that I don't think I would normally have been seen for in this upcoming Ant-Man franchise, which at that point was being directed by Edgar Wright. And so Edgar, who is a big proponent of and supporter of, because he came from the indie film spectrum and from places like South by Southwest, et cetera. In fact, he, a few years later, had his Baby Driver premiere at South by Southwest. But because of all that connectivity, you can't discount how much leverage, if you will, that gave me in the room when we're getting to talk about my film Animals, which is now then wins this award and gets all this really great response from people, whose opinions, are validating. And,
right.
and so that was what is something that in a major way set me aside. I know, obviously I did all my work as an actor to give the best character and audition, et cetera. But regardless, that is huge. So then don't forget, Animals took so many years between me sitting in that, telemarketing office and at the movie theater writing in my notebooks, which that was 2007, 2006 when I'm doing that writing, to the production in 2013, to this festival in 2014, to its actual release from Oscilloscope in 2015, 7 or 8 years of process there. That wasn't the only thing I was writing, guys. Like, I was also then, I had several concepts for television series. I had a concept for my next movie I wanted to make with Colin that I was very passionate about, another deeply personal story. I had some bigger scale features. And so what happened, I think with the success of Animals, and it's why I'm so grateful that we didn't cut corners. There's that idea of like, we didn't cut corners. We made the absolute best thing we could with the corners that we were dealt. And we prepared so heavily, so intensely. I mean, my kitchen in my apartment, my wife is so patient, but that year and a half before production, the walls were covered with schedules, goals, breakdowns, locations, on our own dime, you know, going and just beating the pavement over and over to not settle for that first location that you see. We made this rule of threes, Colin and I, which we always try to stick to. Like, we'd see at least 3 locations for a location. We would talk to at least 3 at this point. Before we had a really great casting director, we ended up getting David O'Connor to cast the movie for us for like pennies. We were like, we'll see at least 3 actors for even every tiny role. For background work, I couldn't afford a background casting director. And some people were like, well, the crew knows people, we'll send out emails, we'll try and get people to bring their own wardrobe, etc. And we said, you can't cut that corner, because when you watch an independent film and the atmosphere isn't executed properly, it instantly takes you out. Just the same way that I think how lighting is so crucial when it comes to independent filmmaking. As soon as you see that sniff of, you know, still fresh out of film school or still learning how to use a package, it makes it so much harder for you to lose yourself in a story. And when I think you see a bunch of 18 to 23-year-olds in business suits trying to fill the location that's supposed to be like an office suite, you go, it just doesn't work. So like a madman, on top of all the other things I was trying to do in the weeks leading up to production, I got this giant board in our production office, and I put posts on Craigslist, in all of the local papers and trades, on the internet. And it said, you know, like, be an extra in a movie. There's no pay. You'll get a free meal, a copy of the movie, and we'll give your character a name. Not a formal name, but you will be like, you know, train passenger or something like that. So you can get an IMDb credit. And if you look at the Animals IMDb, I mean, there are so many people in that cast, because that's what I had to offer people. But if you want that to happen, please send me a picture of yourself with your availability, your contact information, etc. So we had this board where I printed all those pictures, and we got hundreds of people sending us their pictures. We cut them all out, printed them about this big, put them on the wall with sticky tape, and we'd be looking at, okay, for this scene, let's grab these background. And we would always go for twice as many as we actually needed, which was perfect, because every time about half would show up on the day. So we always had, you know, I would email them and say, thank you so much for responding. Can you come on, you know, Tuesday, August 3rd from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and wear comfortable shoes and wear, you know, something that you would normally wear. There was a few times that I was like, can you specifically look like you'd be shopping in a record store or whatever? But it was mostly just come as you are. And
yeah. Whew. I love the scrappiness, man. I mean, it's funny, the juxtaposition, and I want to go into 2 questions, but the first one is the juxtaposition of working that scrappily and also learning how to basically do every job from a production standpoint, which is what you do in making those movies, to then going and working in the Marvel and Disney world. How different of a change that must have felt like. How I guess curious how long that time period was between, like you said, there's the writing period, the production period, the release, and then the impact of that movie and getting Ant-Man eventually out of it. Yeah. what was that time frame? And then what was the huge sort of life-changing difference between those two processes?
And I'll say it's really important to note, I think, two things that have served me very well are being a very goal-oriented person. So writing my goals down, as outlandish as they may be. I have a big board above my desk that it still gets updated on a monthly basis with the, monthly, biannual, annual, and life goals. And then I have smaller pieces that are weekly and monthly. And it's interesting. Some of those goals never changed, especially the ones at the top, but the process of getting there created so many opportunities, and opportunity is the other thing. I looked, and I've always tried to look at every single step along the path as an opportunity. So just to backtrack a little bit, that like web show that we made, which I was able to actually, like, by going to events and doing short films, connect with some people who actually had like really real places in the world of film and television, and tell them about my idea. And it never went anywhere. Or my short films that I did submit to bigger film festivals that never got picked up. Those either rejections or passes became opportunities for me as well to, as I created better and better work, learn to not follow up with people every week or every month, but it's okay to follow up with people once a year, especially when your work is growing and you're starting to yield results. Because people who've passed or said, no thanks to things in the past, also maybe I look back at that work and I go, it shouldn't have been greenlit. It shouldn't have been, it wasn't ready yet. I thought it was at the time and I was frustrated that it wasn't, but the no's always, if I looked at them as an opportunity, allowed me to make the work better. So then Animals finally happens, which leads to Ant-Man happening, which leads to me then being, up until that point, I'd not been on a major big studio set for longer than a few days at a time. So it's hard to really get to know and connect with people in such a short period of time. When you're on a long show like Ant-Man, and thank goodness, because after Edgar left the film, I didn't know I was going to still be a part of it. But luckily, Peyton Reed got involved, and then he still liked me and kept me in his movie, and I become close friends with Peyton to this day. And Peyton, I learned so much watching the way he worked and prepared for his stuff. I learned so much watching the way that intense, large-scale, well-orchestrated crews were able to execute things. I learned so much and made good relationships with people in different departments, from the camera department to the props department, based on the success of, Animals. And then my name or presence or whatever you want to call it, starting to grow in Hollywood, thanks to things like Ant-Man, and when Prisoners was finally released and the response that my performance got there, the TV roles that I was starting to gain. I don't think I brought necessarily any like what they would call like bankable value, but maybe credibility value to project. It helped me to get in the door to be considered for more and more work, which is, when they say work begets work, it really does. Like, oh, that guy, he made that movie at South by that's on Showtime now. And that guy, oh yeah, he's in a Marvel movie, but he must have, it just helps you get a few steps. And then the steps kept getting further and further in. And I'm watching, and next thing I know, I'm on the set of this really, one of my favorite auteur filmmakers, Michel Franco. He's from Mexico, and he just makes incredible films. He's won numerous awards at Cannes Film Festival. But he had cast me in a film that he was making called Chronic, starring Tim Roth. Two of the producers on that film approached me one day and said, oh, we saw Animals, congratulations. Like, we had heard about it and it was great. What else are you working on? And at that point, Colin and I were putting together our next film package, and called All Creatures Here Below. And I said, I've got the script. I could really use your notes if you've got thoughts on it. And they read the script and they said, just the way Chris called me, they called me and were like, we love this script so much. We want to help you get this made. it's so interesting, Matt, because then the process of certain things did speed up in an interesting way. It wasn't like automatically the money was there, but the ability to get to legitimate and larger sources of capital just grew because of what had been accomplished in the past. And because our vision, I don't think, was outlandishly unrealistic. It wasn't like we're going to jump from a $200,000 movie to a $50 million movie, which isn't to say outlandish. If you're out there, you're watching this, and your dream is to make that $50 million movie, go do it. For us, especially with the script that we had that we were really passionate about for All Creatures, we were like, we're not doing another $200,000 movie, but we would be very, very grateful to do something in that, 500 to 1.5 space. And we actually landed right in there. When we finally, and these producers had connections to private finance, to really, some really great opportunities. Some who came back offering to, make the film with us, but if we will go back down to 200,000, we were like, no. We also had some, casting questions along the way, and then ultimately we found a great partner. And it was interesting because then, even at, let's say you're making a movie for $750,000, just as an example, and that sounds like a lot of money, and you're going to make it in 24 days, and you're going to shoot, with a smaller crew and, in locations that are friendly. The challenges are always going to arise. And even though my script was relatively simple, there was lots of driving stuff, which can get expensive. There was also a baby, which is insanely hard to do and insanely expensive. But because of my connections on things like Ant-Man, I could send an email to Russell Bobbitt, head of Marvel Props, because he's now a friend of mine, and say, hey, man, do you have any suggestions on how to solve a problem like a baby without a live baby 99% of the time? And being willing to put yourself out there and ask people for their help or guidance, I think, is totally acceptable, as long as you're being respectful of people's time, as long as you're not asking too much, as long as you're not sending, 20-page emails. It was just, I had a couple of questions for Russell. There was also a cockfighting sequence that was going to be really hard to shoot. And I knew his experience with props and puppetry, maybe he would have some input. Sure enough, Russell, within a few days, sent me back really great ideas on how to solve these problems. And he let us use the prop that he built for The Hangover, the baby, Carlos, that they used in The Hangover, for nothing. Basically, we had to pay a fee to his company, but we rented it for a song, because that's a very expensive prop we would not have been able to afford on our budget. And and we got to use that during the film. And also the fact that Animals was what it was when Karen Gillan, who the deal with our financier and everything was, they wanted to go after 3 big names for the lead female role in All Creatures Here Below. If that didn't work out, they were comfortable still financing the film with just an audition, long process of casting, because they believed in the script so much. But they did want a chance to go after some big names to help, the appeal of the film. And so we agreed, because he didn't want to get caught up in this. We're 3 years of sending it out to big names and waiting for, the agent game to play itself out, which can be so taxing on your spirit. So they went to 3 names, Karen being one of them. She watched Animals. She loved the script. Having that, even though it was a small $200,000 film, to show how we could work, and then to read this new script and her respond to it, she wanted to be in this movie. And this is somebody coming off of the Guardians of the freaking Galaxy, coming off of Jumanji, wanting to star in our movie, which is, you're not going to have a trailer, you're not going to have, any of the luxuries that you're coming from. And I can't say that my connection to the Marvel Universe, or the fact that I had, over the time and the projects I've been working on, become friends with people who then Karen knew, it must have helped, because I'm sure she reached out to people that we mutually know. I don't know, she reached out to James Gunn, or reached out to somebody and said, is this guy a piece of crap, or is he cool, or, like that. Yeah. It's all part of this bigger picture plan. And I'm sitting here today. I now have, I've sold the TV show, which hasn't been announced yet, but I'm really excited about that coming to the to the news cycle in the near future. A feature film that is in a green light process that's really exciting. My comic book, Count Crowley, Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, which I'm so proud of, which Dark Horse does with Peter Lenkoff's company. All those doors were open because they could go, oh, this guy, made this thing that it all comes back to animals. And animals, right, again, goes back to those short films, which I was making with Colin and,
Sure. Well, look, I think taking all of this that you've learned, do you feel that other actors, or I guess that's a very broad statement, but do you think that the majority of actors as a percentage think about the craft as holistically as you do in terms of production, in terms of producing, et cetera?
I definitely think it helps me in that regard. I think that I don't think it's necessary by any means. So if you're an actor and you're watching this and you're just curious about how this stuff works and you don't have the fire in your belly to write and produce the things, then obviously there's no shame in that. Like the same comes with, like, for me, I don't have the fire in my belly to direct. So I don't think it would be right of me to try and sit in a director's chair until I get that fire, because it's such a demanding job. Just like being a gaffer is such a demanding job, and a sound guy is such a demanding job. But because of my experience putting these projects together and seeing the struggles that people go through, if absolutely nothing else, as an actor, it has made me intensely respectful of time. And there is very few things that will make me not want to work with an actor again than even like difficult personality. I can tolerate like gruff or difficult personalities or like snobs or any of that stuff, as long as the time that is scheduled to be worked and that is on set is handled professionally. You'd be surprised. You would be surprised how many people feel entitled to be late to work, to take their time doing things that are, whether it's no one's fault, someone's fault, their fault. We need to be on set at this time. You need to, in between takes, zip your lip and just allow the team to get the thing going and work from a place that is collaborative. So as an actor, I feel grateful that I was given so much perspective on the way in which other people have to do their jobs to make a fully well executed product, and understand that at the end of the day, it makes me look better. I tried to do that with Teacher, which is a film that we collaborated on. Adam Dick's incredible, very personal drama. He made this film. He prepared the heck out of it for years. He worked very hard preparing that film and getting it all set and getting it ready. But it was, my wife and I talk about it often, that was one of the harder psychologically more challenging roles I've done in my career. And so nights at home weren't always the best. I think it was hard to get out of the dark place that I was going to being James, but that's also my job to be able to like understand how to turn those, false emotions on and off. But it was a very, very and it was also very physically demanding, even though there isn't a lot of action in that film. The way he, interacts with his own mental breakdown is a very physical performance. And so it was very hard on me, but I tried my absolute best to, always be as absolutely ready as possible to save us time, because I knew we were on a tight schedule, by not only being prepared, making strong choices, but also by in between the takes, even though I was really suffering, or not suffering, that's too strong a word, but I was struggling mentally during some of that process, just because that character was so challenging. Trying to bring some lightness to that set and make sure everybody was having a good time and feeling like they were appreciated. And I think that's one of the reasons Adam and I just worked so well together, because he has that same attitude. And even on the most frustrating days, like, our ability to laugh and in between takes, just not like be as neat, be as least needy as possible, and like just enjoy
Sure.
that process. That was really important.
Well, it's a good segue. I know we're almost up on time here, so I'll keep it to the point. You've worked with some of the biggest directors in the world, Chris Nolan, Denis Villeneuve, I believe even David Lynch recently.
Speaking of my goals, that was on the top of my list. When I moved to Los Angeles, it was work with the Muppets, be a James Bond villain, and work with David Lynch. Those were my 3 career life goals. The David Lynch thing had happened because I was submitting myself for short films 10 years ago that didn't pay, your pay was getting a DVD. And I was doing that because I wanted the experience. And the casting director of that short film was an assistant to the casting director of David Lynch's films. And so I did my very best to impress her because that was one of my life goals. And she remembered me and she brought me in for him 6-7 years later. And I got to work with him.
Wow.
But sorry, go ahead. Yes.
No. I mean, I think taking now these experiences of, I often use the phrase that the people I find most successful and oftentimes most interesting in this business are people that have a foot sort of on both sides. They have a foot in the creative side and they have the foot in the sort of practical, both business and production world. You clearly have done an incredible job of balancing that. Carrying that forward now to having worked with some of the biggest directors in the world, directors that I know myself and I know a lot of people are just totally obsessed with. Has it changed the way you think about working with them? Has it changed the way you think about learning from them? Does it make you think about the process completely differently than other people that are on those sets?
It's been, if anything, the only change that has happened is that it's been so reaffirming about my instincts and my gut feelings about what it is, what it takes to make the stuff that you can really sink your teeth into, to make the stuff that you can be really proud of, the stuff that has a lasting effect. There's always going to be that genius, talent, whatever factor that is the, intangible, but the consistent thing between, let's say, Colin making Animals on $200,000 with me in Chicago, and then watching the way that Christopher Nolan works, or Denis works, or David works, or any of the great directors that I've had the opportunity to be around. The preparation is impeccable. Like when I would watch Peyton Reed and we're doing an Ant-Man sequence that is so complicated, and like his preparation, his deep understanding and knowledge of how the scene is going to have to work, which causes him to carry his leadership role with such great grace and confidence. This exact same thing. Watching Nolan, I remember watching this guy surrounded by 1,000 extras, crew of hundreds, IMAX camera here, another camera here, another camera here, DP getting a little bit nervous because the sun is now shifted to a point in which they don't have the right angle that had been planned, and then the locations people being like, this giant massive street is not ours at a certain time, and seeing how his planning and preparation and the thought that he had put into the work, being able to solve that problem and be like, well, we could turn it around here because what we really need from the story is these elements. So can we get these elements from here? We had said we really want to be able to see this. Oh, and the nice discovery is if we look over here, we also are going to get to catch a little glimmer of this here. So let's do this, make an adjustment. They shoot. It works perfectly. It's a moment that's in the film that I think is really cool. I see it time and again, that intense, almost crazy degree of preparation and discipline and hard work in tandem with obviously the vision, the talent, the genius, the creativity, and then the ability to get thrown a curveball and know how, like a real ace player, to know when not to swing. It's amazing.
Right.
And so it just really affirmed that for me. It also affirmed one other thing that's really important is the value of kindness and how you treat people, because all of these amazing directors that I've gotten to be around who work at the top of their games, they are the tops of their games are just really gracious, kind, and the kind of people who treat others with respect, which is really, really vital.
Great. It's excellent, man. Oh, look, I've taken up a huge amount of your time, and I really, really appreciate it. It's fascinating.
Didn't know, did you, man? You were like, oh, let's talk animals, and I just get going. It's been so long. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to unload and reminisce, because that is truly one of my great memories as a storyteller, and also, being a part of Teacher with you, and that's another one that just coming strictly from the acting side of things, but
it was a phenomenal experience. It's been great getting to know you. Been great getting to work with you. I've been a fan of the roles, obviously, you've done that are, again, with some of those incredible masters of cinema. And you're a good dude at the end of the day as well, which is always a nice thing to find out.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I hope you're staying healthy and happy and as sane as possible in this crazy time. And everybody, who's checked in to enjoy this conversation, I hope that you're staying safe and healthy. And I can't wait till we're all back on set and making more stories for people to enjoy.
Agreed, man. Well, again, have a good afternoon. Thank you so much, David, and we will catch up soon.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, dude. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. For financing questions, feel free to contact us at Bondit Media Capital at info@bondit.us. For production, development, and distribution questions, feel free to contact us at Buffalo 8, info@buffalo8.com. We'd love to hear from you and hope you'll continue listening to the podcast episodes ahead.